You're either going to really love it or you're going to really hate it. It's a very different coffee.
Every single step of the journey has the potential to destroy the coffee. I think disaster struck again.
Love affairs and so forth. Earthiness. Giling Basha process. If you were in a coffee shop, you're going to hear the words probably Begeo Mountain, Tarkangon, hear Lake Laut Tawa.
Welcome to
Bean stuff.
Today on the podcast, we are talking about a coffee that hopefully some of you have tried, maybe a lot of you have tried, but we're talking about coffee that comes from the country of Sumatra.
My inclination is you're either going to really love it or you're going to really hate it.
My first question is when, let's say I'm in the coffee shop right now, drinking a Sumatra coffee. When I say to Sumatra to you, what is the first thing that comes to your mind as far as flavor goes?
Earthiness, like wet, damp soil.
It's not initially what I would describe as the thing that I want out of my coffee is a wet, damp soil. But you know what? Sometimes that earthy tone, maybe in a blend or even on its own, could be good.
And I think that's its popularity in terms it's a very different coffee that you're going to get from, rather than what you're going to get from anywhere else in the world. And it's one of those coffees that you can have for a few days, then you might go off for a bit, then you'll have it back again, because that unique taste, that earthiness of a Sumatra, you're not going to get it anywhere else. And therefore, you sort of, often my experience is you hate it to start with, you start to like it, you start to love it, and you go, wow, I'm really liking this Sumatra now.
Sumatra is located in Indonesia, in case you weren't sure where it was.
Now that's another, of all the coffees we do cupping, Sumatra, Indonesia, it's very confusing for those who don't live around that area, that region.
Right.
And you've got Indonesia, and within Indonesia, you've got Sumatra, you've got Java, you've got Sulawesi, you've got New Guinea or Guinea. And it's just a whole lot of countries in there, in this Asian area. And one of them is Sumatra.
When we talk about coffee production in Sumatra, how much of that's Robusta and how much of that is going to be Arabica?
Yeah, it's changed, and from what I can gather now, it's around about 75% is Robusta.
Wow.
And 25% is Arabica. So that's a change from what it used to have, and through different reasons. And
I wonder if people are hearing that statistic for the first time and going, wow, that's a lot of Robusta coffee. Man, that's a lot of bad coffee. I would say, I would caveat that with, go ahead and go back in our episodes. Go ahead and listen to the Robusta versus Arabica episode, just to give you some, maybe hopefully open your mind up to Arabica and Robusta. How do we get coffee into a country that didn't naturally start with coffee?
Yeah, that's happened in the history of coffee a few times. A big player in that one would be the Dutch.
The Dutch, Holland.
In Holland, which is a long way from Sumatra.
That is a long way. So what connection does Holland have with Sumatra?
Well, they were a big force in those days, and they were wanting to be a bigger force. That's a simplified history version of it. And
you covered a lot of ground there.
I did. A lot of region I did. There was a Dutch governor who actually was in India. So Holland's got the little bit of India going there as well.
Right.
And he sends some Arabica seedlings to Yemen, from Yemen, I should say, to the Dutch governor in, I think it's Batavia, which is now Jakarta. This is 1696.
It's a little while ago.
It's a little while ago.
Not last week.
So you got all these players and countries, mainly the Dutch, whether in India, Yemen, or Jakarta, and they plant them in Jakarta.
Yeah.
And the first seedlings start coming up, and there's a flood.
Oh.
Water, they ruins the whole crop, so they can't do that anymore.
Wow. So the first shipment of seeds comes across and it's destroyed.
I think about 3 years later, some more shipment of seeds come. The plants grow, and in around about, I think, 1711, the first exports, so they've grown for a few years now.
Well, as we talked about in our growing episode, it takes a little bit of time, 4 to 5 years for those to be fruitful.
To mature and start to do the right thing. But 1711, those the first coffee gets sent from Java all the way back to Europe via the Dutch East Indian Company, which is a big player in the history of coffee.
Well, and it's interesting because, we had a conversation with Adam Carpenter, and we even talked with Michael Ryan about this a little bit. But, we talk about China coffee in China and how that's growing and how that's evolving, I guess, and how it's happening so rapidly.
Yes.
Whereas we look at Sumatra, this started way back in the 1600s.
Yes.
It's had that long to get to where it's at today. So it's just interesting to see the different pace of growth for coffee in those countries.
Hopefully it's a change. I mean, it is a change, but hopefully there's not so much of this going on now. I don't think there is. But the whole thing of forced labor, we'd probably call it slavery.
Right.
And that was back in those eras, there was a lot of that going on. So a lot of Sumatrans in Java, they would be forced to produce coffee, and then it got sent away, and they didn't get any of the money back from that.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about 1830 to 1870. So you got sort of 40 years there of this forced labor and getting sent back to Europe. At the same time that's happening, Brazil suddenly becomes a force. There's a whole history of how coffee got to Brazil, love affairs and so forth. And suddenly it gets eclipsed by Brazil. So suddenly it starts to drop in terms of they're not the only player when it comes to coffee.
Yeah, it's amazing in all these things we've seen so far. We find that every single step of the journey is a potential, it has the potential to destroy the coffee, whether it be the flavor, whether it be the actual fruit or the seed, anything. There's so many steps to the amazing cup that we get. It's amazing that it doesn't get messed up more.
It's amazing.
Even in this story, we have scenarios where floods are wiping out this first crop, and then the second crop comes, and then in 1876. I think disaster struck again when there was a rust disease. Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct. That's something that is happening often, and rust is happening today, I should say.
And we're not talking, for those of you who don't know what rust is, we're not talking about like rust as you would see on an old car. This is rust as a disease on a coffee plant.
That's right. It looks like rust on the leaf, the green leaf, but you've got all this brown stuff. And that's rust.
Right.
Yeah, it's not the metal stuff.
No.
But again, so that wipes out this whole Arabica, Typica thing that's going on there. And what they decide to do, whoever they are, they bring in the Robusta plant, which
again, if you go back to the Robusta Arabica episode, we talk about how much, no pun intended, more robust the Robusta plant is. It has a lot more resistance to disease and all those kind of things. So, in a situation.
Economic sense, yeah.
Right. And here we're seeing rust. We've had floods. I can see how the Robusta would be a nice addition.
That's right. And two, as we were talking at the beginning there, you get now 75% of coffee production in Sumatra is now the Robusta. That's from sort of dates back to then. And now you've got another 25% that has come and grown and flourished in certain parts of Sumatra. And again, I'm so thankful to have a cup of Sumatran coffee in the morning.
Right.
That 25% is there. And we've managed to take that and we get to drink it today.
When we talk about Arabica and we talk about specifically Arabica from Sumatra, what are the most common types of Arabica that we see coming from Sumatra?
I mean, you've got Sumatra, you've got Bourbon, you've got Typica, which is the most common, I probably should say. You've got Bourbon. Then you've got a whole of hybrids, and I can't pronounce them all, but Caturra, Catamore, Hybrido di Timor, Tim Tim, and an Ethiopian line called Rambug and Abyssinia.
Whew, wow, interesting.
So there's a few things that have happened there of how they've progressed and what they grow there now in Sumatra, and also what suits that whole region.
And it's interesting too because we've talked about in our episode where we had a couple of episodes where we went through different processing, whether it's wet process, dry process, and we talked a little bit about the different processes and how some may be helpful in areas where water is scarce. And specifically in regards to Sumatra, water is a little bit scarce. So once we've grown that coffee, how are they typically processing that once it's been picked from the tree? What process does it go through?
That's right, and I'm not sure if we even mentioned this particular process because it's unique in some ways to that whole area.
I think we may have spouted out the word or something.
The name, and the name is Giling Basha process.
It sounds intense.
I should have looked up exactly what that means. That probably means something in itself.
I know it just sounds like bashing and brutal and
if I was
intense.
going to say how this process works, you're probably not too far away what's going on. Not as damaging as that, because
Right.
you don't want to damage the bean. But as you said, because of the whole water situation, they don't want to go for the wet process that uses a lot of water.
A lot of water.
So the Giling Basha, basically they take the seed that's taken off the plant, it's pulped, the skin gets taken off, it gets dried, and this is where it starts to change, and they don't wait for it to get to a certain moisture. They do it a little sooner than all the other processes do.
Right.
And they hull it, they rip off.
Because you were saying, I think when we talked before the episode, you were saying they wait around 1 to 2 days for it to dry, which can be quite short compared to like other processes.
From 1 to 2 to 3 weeks or longer, yeah.
Right, so you're not reducing it to a moisture level where a lot of other coffees get to before they get processed.
You'll see, if you look at the green beans, you'll see it looks like a more bluish. It looks like it's got moisture in there. You need a moisture tester to see exactly how much it is. And Sumatra are allowed, I'm not sure who they are again, but they tend to have a little higher on the moisture content than a typical wet or dry processed coffee is.
Interesting, because it seems like you'd be at more risk for mold, for those kind of things.
Well, that's the fine line you tread as a farmer in Sumatra. You are in more line for that.
Right.
You're going to get more damage in that particular way. And if you look at a handful of green Sumatra to a handful of whatever, Guatemala, it doesn't really matter, you will notice. You don't have to be into coffee. You don't have to be that well, educated in it. You look and say, this one, they're all broken. This one looks great.
Right.
And the broken ones are usually the Sumatra ones, and they have different grades. Interesting fact here is, I remember we used to get grade. We say, oh, let's get grade 1. That's the best one you can get.
Yeah. How many grades are there?
Oh, there's a few. I know of 3, but there's probably more than that.
But grade 1 being the best.
Yes, it's the most picked out, and they would go through. You talk about how many times the sorters would go through it, and it could be 2, 3 times they've gone through trying to get rid of all the debris that could be in there.
Yeah.
Interesting thing though, what we found, we started realizing we tasted it, and it tasted clean. It didn't taste like Sumatran coffee that we're looking for. That hay note, we're looking for the earthy note.
Yeah.
The full body was much cleaner, and it just seemed
it lost some of that moist soil.
It did. It did. So what we ended up doing in our case, and it changes every year, but we decided to get grade 2 that year because it was more of a Sumatran a taste. And so it's nice. It's a little cheaper because someone says grade 2, oh, that's not as good. In our eyes, it was pretty good. It was a good cup of Sumatra in the morning again.
And that's an interesting thing. You're working with going through this Giling Basha process. You get this more rugged, I guess you could say, coffee. Mm-hmm. But in some senses, that ruggedness helps to add to the flavor. Whereas if you reduce that, you make it this perfectly clean coffee, you actually get something that's not quite the product you're hoping for.
Exactly.
Some more kind of factual stuff as far as like the harvest, for instance, is around, is it between October and March is kind of like your harvest season?
Typically, yes. And it varies again depending what part of Sumatra you're getting your coffee from. And
year to year as well.
Yeah, the growth and so forth. But yeah, October, March, that sounds about right.
And about like what percentage, like, so for, if we're looking at the world of coffee, what percentage of the world's coffee comes from like the Indonesia area?
This intrigued me as I looked at the facts and just what was happening there in the terms of the world. It was the 3rd largest producer in the world. This was Indonesia. This is not just Sumatra.
Right, the region of Indonesia.
So that's 3rd in the world. I know
that's coming up against some big producers like Brazil.
I'm not sure 2nd. I don't know if they're including like Vietnam or something. I don't know what ones they're including there because that's Robusta, of course.
Right.
But it's high.
It's up there.
It's a big player when it comes to the world scene in coffee.
And what regions within Sumatra are well known for their coffee?
Well, there's a few regions. By the way, you missed one fact there, and that was the percentage of the world market. So how much coffee out there, how much of it is Indonesian, and that's 7%.
Wow.
Which is, again, a lot of percentage for...
that's almost one tenth of the world's coffee.
Exactly. Now, regions, you're saying, there's a few regions in Sumatra. It's an island. It spreads out from north to south, as a lot of islands do.
And everything typically tends to go north to south and east to west.
I know. And you've got different regions. One's the Aceh, ACEH region. That's the north part of Sumatra now. That's where we've typically got a lot of our coffee from. If you were in a coffee shop, you're going to hear the words probably the Gayo Mountain, Takengon. You may hear Lake Laut Tawa. There's a few places within that northern region of Aceh that we get our coffees from.
So, Dad, we were talking before the podcast, and you had mentioned Sumatra Mendeling, and you had kind of told me an interesting story about it and how that name came about. It was different to what I expected because we were going through all these different areas, and typically they're named after like the geographical region where you find the coffee. Yeah. But not so the case with the Sumatra Mendeling. So, can you divulge that story for us?
Sure. I'm sure it's evolved over time from me, and even when I first read it 20 years ago. It's interesting. I'm sure it's one of the only coffees that is named not after the region, but it's named after, and here's the story, is in World War II, a Japanese military man was stationed in Sumatra. He had a cup of coffee, thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
So he asked the local Sumatran, where he got it from, I'm assuming, where's this coffee? What's this coffee? And the Sumatran thought he was asking where was the person who he's talking.
He was asking, like I said, Dad, where are you from?
Yeah, I'd say, well, I'm from New Zealand,
right?
Or Palmerston North, whatever, Wanganui. But so the Sumatra man said almost the same thing, but he said, I'm from Mendeling. He thought he was talking about a family group and so forth. And so this Japanese soldier or whatever, after the war, gets back home, wants more of this wonderful cup of coffee, this Sumatra coffee. And he I don't know if he's an importer or however he gets how this works.
Yeah.
But he asks for, rather than Takengon or Gayo Mountain, he'll ask, I want some Mendeling. And I guess they go through a frantic shot. Where is this coffee? And they suddenly work it out. Oh, it's from this area, the north. And they send it to him, and they just, I don't know, politely call it Mendeling.
They said, if you want to pay for it, we'll send it.
It seems that's the case.
We've got a couple more here. We've got the Lintong and the Lumpang.
Oh, mate, you're selling good.
I almost said lumping, but it's Lumpang.
Lumpang.
And so these are in the southern area of Sumatra, is that correct?
Yes, more so. Lington and Aceh are more Arabica growing coffees. There's some starting to grow down the south now. And with some really interesting really nice characteristics. It may not be typically the Sumatra, but man, it's a good coffee.
And the Lumpang is actually a Robusta, correct?
The Lumpang is there.
Or the region, it's the largest Robusta producing region in Sumatra.
Correct. And the Lington, we didn't say that's found around Lake Toba, I should say. It's 1,200 to 1,500 meters. And that's where some of the greatest, depends who you are, Arabica coffee comes from. But you're right, Lumpang, down by the south, now you've got a huge production of the Robusta coming out of there in Sumatra.
As we begin to wrap up, I have a question for you, and that is, where do you see yourself using Sumatran coffee in coffee? Do you mostly use it as a blend, or do you typically do it as its own coffee, like a single origin?
There's both is probably the answer to that. We used to use it more in a blend. In Sumatra, where it's situated, it's had some tsunamis and things going on that have pushed the price up at that stage really high.
Is consistency year to year a thing as well?
That's another part of it. And because it's that Giling Basha process and just what's going on there, it's dried in one place, then they get rid of it and someone else carries on drying it and they get their money and then it dries somewhere else. So it does get to the eventual moisture content you want, but it's passed through a lot of hands because they want their money more quickly than waiting 2 months, whatever it may be.
Right.
But Sumatra, the blend or an estate, we do it both. And as I say, we used to do it more in blends, but as tsunamis came and the price went way sky high, we had to cut it down in our blends. We had in our blends of coffee, particularly for an espresso, it brings this body, this texture to the coffee that you can't really get from another source as such. It's just good in a blend.
Yeah.
You don't want too much though, because some, as I said right at the beginning, is it earthy or hay? And some would say, it tastes like hay, your espresso. You don't want that.
Right. It gives a nice undertone, a good body.
Exactly.
But you don't want it to overpower the palate.
You don't want that. It's a very powerful thing that it'll take over your espresso. As an estate, again, it's whether you like it or not. And I think there's really good Sumatra coffee out there. and it's going to be your preference whether you're going to buy a Sumatra. For us, yes, they do. I mean, I know lots of friends who enjoy a good cup of Sumatra.
So I think, if you're at a coffee shop, or if you could go to a coffee shop, it's something to try. If you see Sumatra there, you go, oh, I'm going to try that. Or if they have a blend, you might even ask them, like, do you have Sumatra in that blend?
I wouldn't say. Recently, last year, when I was in Portland at a coffee shop with a friend, they actually had the Sumatra as an espresso. And surprise, it was really good.
Just single origin Sumatra.
Single origin as an espresso. So
wow.
There now you're getting to terms of what you buy green, how it's roasted,
right,
and then how the barista prepares it, makes a big difference. And you go, wow, that was really nice. Thank you.
Well, so that's kind of a little bit of history, a little bit of interesting facts, a little bit of kind of knowledge on Sumatra. If we got anything wrong, or if there's something we left out, or if you've got any questions, definitely let us know. We kind of want to help to educate, hopefully make your next cup of coffee a little bit more interesting, a little bit more intriguing, and give you a little bit more context to what's in your cup. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks.